Keep your hands where I can see them. Driver's license and registration, now! You think you can drive around here doing that? Who do you think you are? I'm just trying to get home, officer. Please. You think you can drive around here like this? I told you I didn't see it! Don't lie to me. Take this. You think this is a joke? Get your hands up. Right now. You hear me? Right. Now. Back up. Officer needs assistance. Suspect resisting. Get units here now.
I'm not doing anything. Calm down.
You think you could talk to me like that? Try me. Get back now. I'm not moving. Ah! Don't look at me like that. Tell me what I want to know. You're hiding something. I don't know anything. I've told you already.
Boots, down on your knees, right here on the asphalt. That's how boys like you learn to talk to a badge. Boots. Elijah Marsh did not move. His palms stayed flat against the hood of his own truck, 10 and 2, the metal still ticking with the last heat off the engine. Boots. I am a United States Marine, he said. His voice did not rise. My license and registration are already in your hand, Deputy. Boots. I don't care if you're the King of England, Deputy Wade Colton said. Out here, in Birchwood Point, at 9:14 on a Friday night, you're a big black man in a gray hoodie standing exactly where the Ashcombe County Sheriff's Department says you don't belong. Boots. 2 houses down, a woman in a cardigan lifted her phone and filmed through the kitchen window. Nobody stepped outside. Boots. Nobody said a word. The only sounds were the tick of the cooling engine, the static hiss of Colton's radio, and somewhere behind a row of boxwoods, a dog hurling itself against a fence it would never clear. Boots. Colton had no way of knowing, could not have possibly known, that in 4 hours and 11 minutes a 4-star general would walk through the doors of the Ashcombe County Sheriff's Station, stop in front of a holding cell, and salute the man he was about to arrest. Boots. To understand how a routine traffic stop became the story that would end one man's career and remake an entire county, you have to go back 14 years, to a kitchen table in Millbrook, North Carolina, where a woman named Corinne Marsh packed a lunch for a boy who was about to become a man the hard way. Boots. Millbrook was the kind of town where the water tower still had the high school mascot painted on it, and everyone knew whose porch light stayed on too late. Boots. Corinne worked the lunch line at Millbrook Elementary for 26 years, hairnet on before the sun came up, home after the streetlights buzzed to life. Boots. She raised 3 boys on a cafeteria aide's wage of $11.40 an hour, and a stubborn refusal to ask the church, the state, or anybody else for a single dime more than she'd earned. Boots. Elijah was the middle son, the quiet one. His older brother chased trouble. His younger brother chased girls. Elijah chased structure, order, a reason to stand up straight. Boots. He found it on a Tuesday afternoon in a strip mall recruiting office off Route 9, 3 days before his high school graduation, when he signed his name on the dotted line before he'd even told his mother. Boots. Corinne cried the whole 40-minute drive to the bus station in Greensboro. She packed him a paper sack lunch like he was still walking to third period. A turkey sandwich, an apple, and a folded index card tucked between them that read, in her careful cursive, "Stand tall." Boots. I already know who you are. He kept that card in his left breast pocket for 14 years. It went to Fallujah with him. Boots. It went to Kandahar with him. It was in his pocket the night everything in this story happened. Boot camp broke plenty of 18-year-olds who thought they were tougher than they turned out to be. Boots. It did not break Elijah Marsh. He thrived on it. The order, the brotherhood, the terrible clean clarity of knowing exactly who you were and what you stood for. Boots. He moved through the ranks the way water moves downhill, like it had been waiting for him the whole time. Boots. By 22, he had already deployed twice, once outside Fallujah and once through the Korengal Valley. It was his 3rd deployment to Kunar Province that changed the direction of his entire life. Boots. It was an August morning, 114 degrees before 9 a.m., and Elijah's 12-man squad was pushing through a narrow wadi when the first round cracked off a canyon wall above them. Boots. Then a second. Then the whole ridgeline opened up at once. In the first 11 seconds, Corporal Nathaniel Vance took a round through his right thigh and went down screaming into open ground. Boots. 20 feet from him, Private First Class Corey Hastings caught shrapnel across his back and stopped moving altogether. Both men were pinned in a kill zone with no cover, taking fire from 3 directions, and every Marine behind that boulder line knew the arithmetic. Boots. Going out there meant dying. Elijah went anyway. He covered 410 meters of open wadi, with bullets snapping the dirt at his heels, got a fist around Vance's vest, and dragged 220 pounds of dead weight back behind a collapsed stone wall. Boots. Then he went out again into the same fire and pulled Hastings out by the drag handle on his plate carrier. Boots. He still wasn't finished. Boots. While the rest of the squad laid down suppressive fire, Elijah flanked the ridge alone, moved through the rocks like something the enemy couldn't quite track, and silenced the position with what his company commander later called, under oath, in a sworn statement, the single most extraordinary act of individual courage I witnessed in 28 years of service. Boots. For that morning, Elijah Marsh received the Congressional Medal of Honor. The ceremony was in the East Room of the White House. Boots. The president draped the pale blue ribbon around his neck while Corinne stood in the front row and cried into the same hands that had packed that paper sack lunch 9 years earlier. Boots. The man who pinned the medal into place beside the president was a 4-star general named Thaddeus Renner, commanding general of Marine Forces Command, a man with 39 years in uniform and a reputation for never once raising his voice in front of a formation. Boots. After the ceremony, Renner pulled Elijah aside, gripped his shoulder hard enough to leave a mark, and said 5 words the younger man never forgot. Boots, you are the best of us. From that day forward, Renner was more than a commanding officer on a program somewhere. Boots. He called on Elijah's birthday, every year without fail. He wrote a letter by hand after every promotion. It was the kind of bond that only forms between 2 men when one of them has watched the other run directly into death and walk back out the other side. Boots. Elijah served 3 more years after the ceremony. Then he retired, not because he was tired of the Corps, but because something else had started pulling at him harder. Boots. The kids back in Millbrook. The ones growing up the way he had, without a father in the house, without much money, in a world that had already decided what they were before they'd had a single chance to prove otherwise. Boots. So he started showing up. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, he stood in front of a folding chair classroom at the Millbrook Community Center and taught teenagers discipline, respect, and how to believe in themselves on the nights nobody else did. Boots. 41 kids were enrolled that spring. He had brought his Medal of Honor to show them that Friday because a 15-year-old named Darius had asked, half joking, whether it was even real. Boots. It sat now in its small black display case tucked into the glove compartment of his black Chevy Silverado, 40 minutes from home. Boots. He was cutting through Birchwood Point, a gated, manicured neighborhood of $500,000 colonials outside Ashcombe, only because Route 9 was closed for repaving. Boots. He had his audiobook playing low, his windows up, his headlights on, and his speedometer sitting exactly on 30. And that's when the red and blue lights bloomed in his rearview mirror. Boots. Now rewind, just slightly, because to understand exactly how a clean traffic stop turned into a national headline, you need to see it from both directions. Boots. Deputy Wade Colton had worn the Ashcombe County badge for 16 years. 41 years old, thick through the shoulders, a buzz cut that hadn't changed since the academy, and a reputation that depended entirely on who you asked. Boots. To the residents of Birchwood Point, Colton was the man who kept the neighborhood safe. He rolled through twice a shift, waved at the retirees walking their labradoodles, parked his cruiser at the front gate so people could sleep with their windows cracked. Boots. To the department's internal affairs office, Colton was a different file altogether. 4 excessive force complaints in 9 years, every single one closed without an outside review. Boots. It was a pattern anyone paying attention should have caught. Nobody was paying attention, because Colton's supervisor, Sheriff Douglas Pratt, believed in exactly one metric. Boots. Numbers, and Colton produced numbers. What the numbers never showed was how he got them. Colton called it instinct. Other people, quietly, had a different word for it. Boots. He liked to cruise the wealthier subdivisions after dark, watching for anything that felt off, and more often than not, what felt off to Wade Colton was a black or brown face, somewhere he'd already decided it didn't belong. Boots. He never wrote that down, of course. On the report, it was always something clean, a taillight, a lane change, a vehicle matching a description that existed only in his own head. Boots. That night, the excuse was even thinner than usual. Birchwood Point had logged 6 car break-ins in 11 days. The neighborhood Facebook group had 412 comments demanding more patrols. Boots. Sheriff Pratt had told Colton in front of 2 other deputies to increase visibility in the subdivision. Boots. So when Colton clocked a black Chevy Silverado, turning off the county road onto Birchwood Point's south entrance at dusk, driven by a black man in a gray hoodie, his radio was already up at his mouth before his brain had finished forming the thought. Boots. Got eyes on a suspicious vehicle, he said into the receiver. Black male, dark pickup, entering Birchwood from the south gate. Boots. Light him up. On the other end of that radio was Deputy Elliot Doyle, 26 years old, 2 years on the job, lean, wound tight, still trying to walk like Colton without quite knowing why. Boots. Doyle had ridden shotgun with Colton for 7 months, and in that time he'd absorbed exactly one unspoken rule of the department. Boots. You do not question Wade. Doyle boxed the Silverado in behind Colton's cruiser, lights up siren off, the kind of stop that looks routine from the sidewalk and is anything but. Boots. Elijah saw the lights in his mirror and did not panic and did not speed up. He did what 14 years of training had drilled into his body until it was no longer a decision. Boots. He controlled the moment by controlling himself first. He pulled to the shoulder, cut the engine, flicked on the interior dome light so the officer could see straight into the cab, and set both hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, and waited. Boots. His heart rate did not change. He had survived ambushes in a canyon where the walls themselves seemed to be shooting at him. Boots. A traffic stop in North Carolina was not going to rattle him. Colton approached from the driver's side. Doyle hung back at the passenger window, flashlight sweeping the interior. Standard positioning. Boots. Colton's hand, however, was already resting on his holster. That was not standard. Colton didn't identify himself, didn't state a reason for the stop. Boots. He raised his flashlight and shined it directly into Elijah's face and held it there, unmoving, until the light itself became the interrogation. Boots. License and registration, Colton said. No greeting, no badge number, just a command dropped like a stone. Yes, officer, Elijah answered. Boots. I'm going to reach into my back pocket for my wallet. Slowly. You'd better. Elijah drew his license and pulled his registration from the visor and passed both through the open window with 2 fingers. Boots. Colton studied the license under his flashlight the way a man studies a bill he suspects is counterfeit. Elijah Marsh. Boots. Age 34. Millbrook, North Carolina. No warrants, no priors. The registration matched the truck. The truck matched the plate. There was nothing here, nothing at all. And any reasonable officer standing on that road would have handed the documents back through the window and said, "Have a good night." Boots. Colton did not hand them back. Elijah Marsh, he read aloud, drawing it out like the name itself was a punchline. Boots. What are you doing out here in Birchwood, Elijah? Cutting through, officer. Route 9's closed for paving. Cutting through. Colton leaned into the window frame, close enough that Elijah could smell burnt coffee and chewing tobacco. Boots. Through Birchwood. After dark. In a hoodie. Elijah said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse, and he had learned that lesson a long time ago on a different continent. Boots. Colton let the silence stretch, then keyed his radio and ran the plates through dispatch. The response came back clean in under a minute. Boots. Registered owner Elijah Marsh. No flags, no reports. Colton stared at his own radio like it had personally betrayed him. Boots. Doyle drifted up to the passenger window and tapped the glass. Plates are clean, Wade. Registration matches. We good here? Boots. Colton didn't look at him. His flashlight hadn't moved an inch off Elijah's face. No, he said, quiet and flat. Boots. We're not good. Step out of the vehicle. May I ask why, officer? My paperwork is in order. I haven't broken a law. Boots. You're being detained as part of an active investigation. Step out now. What investigation, sir? Colton leaned in until Elijah could feel the heat off his skin. Boots. You want to play lawyer with me, boy? I said, get out. Elijah took one slow breath through his nose and let it go through his mouth. A trick he'd taught himself in a foxhole outside Fallujah when mortar rounds were landing close enough to feel through the ground and panic was the one thing that killed faster than shrapnel. Boots. He opened the door, stepped out, hands visible the entire time. October air hit his skin, cool and clean, and somewhere down the block a dog barked twice and went quiet. Boots. Red and blue light washed across the manicured lawns of Birchwood Point like something had spilled, and nobody had bothered to clean it up. Boots. Hands on the hood, Colton said. Spread your feet. Elijah complied. The hood was still warm under his palms. A silver Lexus rolled past at a crawl. An older couple inside, the woman craning her neck to look, the man staring straight ahead like the road itself required his full attention. Boots. Neither of them stopped. Colton waved them along without turning his head. Nothing to see here, folks. Routine stop. Routine. Boots. The word hung there in the October air while Elijah Marsh, Medal of Honor recipient, decorated combat veteran, mentor to 41 at-risk teenagers, stood spread-eagled against his own truck in a neighborhood where his only offense was existing in it. Boots. Behind him, Doyle shifted his weight from one boot to the other, opened his mouth like he had something to say, and closed it again without a word. Boots. This was only the beginning. Keep watching what happens to that small black display case, still sitting in the glove compartment. You're going to want to remember exactly where it is. Boots. What came next took less than 18 minutes by the timestamp on Colton's own dashboard camera. For Elijah, hands flat on that hood, it felt like it lasted a different length of time entirely. Boots. Colton circled behind him slowly, boots grinding gravel, taking his time the way a man does when he knows he holds every card and wants you to feel the weight of each one. Boots. Here's what I think, Colton said, almost conversational, which was the worst part of it. I think you're not cutting through anywhere. Boots. I think you're casing this neighborhood. We've had 6 break-ins in 11 days, and here you come. Big guy, dark truck, after dark, hood up. Boots. I volunteer at a community center, Elijah said. I mentor kids there. I was driving home from a session. You mentor kids. Boots. Colton repeated it back like it was the most absurd sentence he'd ever been forced to hear. Teaching them how to case a house. Boots. Elijah didn't answer that one. He stared at the reflection of the light bar rippling across the black paint of his own hood and focused on his breathing. Steady, controlled, the same discipline that had carried 2 wounded men across 400 meters of open fire. Boots. Colton leaned in close behind him. I'm going to search your vehicle. On what grounds, officer? I smell marijuana. And there it was. The oldest line in the entire playbook. 3 words that handed a badge permission to tear a man's life apart with no warrant, no evidence, nothing but one officer's word standing against everyone else's. Boots. There is no marijuana in that truck, Elijah said. I don't use drugs. Never have, not once in 14 years of service. Boots. Well, my nose says different, Colton said, and last I checked, my nose has a badge pinned to it. He walked to the truck and started tearing it apart, and it was obvious from the first motion that he wasn't looking for anything at all. Boots. He wasn't careful, he wasn't systematic. He was making a mess on purpose, the way a man burns something he wants to watch burn. Boots. He hauled the gym bag out from behind the seat and hurled it into the road. The zipper split, and a towel and a water bottle, and a folded change of clothes scattered across the asphalt. Boots. He stepped on the shirt walking past it. He grabbed a jacket off the passenger seat and dropped it in the gutter. Boots. He ripped open the center console and threw a phone charger and a pack of gum onto the floorboard. He popped the rear storage bin and dumped a box of supplies. Markers, laminated name tags, a stack of printed worksheets from the mentorship program. Across the back seat like it was trash headed for the curb. Boots. Elijah watched over his shoulder. Every single item hitting the ground was something he had packed that morning, with his own 2 hands, with care, for 41 kids who were counting on him showing up Tuesday. Boots. Every toss, every careless slam carried the same unspoken message. You don't matter. None of what's yours matters. You are nothing out here. Boots. At the porch 3 doors down, the woman in the cardigan had come outside now, phone still up, recording. A man in a Panthers jersey stepped onto his own driveway with a beer in his hand and called out, not to help, but to needle. Boots. Get 'em, Wade. Then, louder, to nobody in particular, that's exactly why we voted for more patrols out here. A second neighbor, an older man in a bathrobe, walked halfway down his own front walk before his wife pulled him back inside by the sleeve. Boots. Nobody crossed the property line. Nobody came closer than their own mailbox. 11 people, by Elijah's own later count from the footage, watched the entire thing unfold from a safe and comfortable distance, and 11 people decided that whatever this was, it wasn't theirs to interrupt. Boots. Colton keyed his radio a second time. Dispatch requesting a K9 unit to my location, Birchwood Point Southgate, possible narcotics and a stolen vehicle. Boots. The dispatcher's voice crackled back a question. A stolen vehicle report, deputy, or a suspicion, and Colton talked over her before she finished the sentence. Boots. Just send the dog. By now, 4 more porch lights had switched on along the cul-de-sac. A teenager on a bicycle braked hard at the corner, phone already up, and got close enough to catch 20 seconds of footage before his own mother called him inside by name, twice, sharper the second time. Boots. The man in the Panthers jersey had crossed onto his own lawn now, close enough to shout without leaving his property line, calling out that they ought to check the truck bed too. You never know what these guys are hauling. Boots. Nobody asked him how he knew what these guys usually hauled. Nobody needed to. The air on that street had gone thick and airless, the particular kind of quiet that isn't peace at all, but a whole neighborhood collectively deciding not to look directly at what it was watching. Boots. Doyle stood near Elijah, silent, his flashlight beam dropped to the ground. After a long stretch of quiet, he spoke, almost a whisper. Boots. So, Marine, huh? What unit? 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Elijah said. How many tours? 4. 2 in Iraq. Boots. 2 in Afghanistan. Doyle nodded slowly, his mouth pressed into a thin line like there was something bigger sitting right behind his teeth that refused to come out. Boots. Inside the truck, Colton had reached the glove compartment. He popped it open, pulled out the owner's manual, a tire gauge, a small flashlight, and then a black display case about the size of a hardcover book. Heavier in his hand than its size suggested it should be. Boots. He turned it over once, twice, then flipped the latch. Inside, resting on a bed of dark blue velvet, was a 5-pointed gold star hanging from a pale blue ribbon set with 13 white stars, the single most sacred military decoration the United States government has ever issued. Boots. Fewer than 3,500 people in the entire history of the nation have ever worn one. Colton stared at it like it was a foreign object dropped from orbit. Boots. He had no idea what he was holding. What in the hell is this? He said. Elijah turned his head enough to see the case in Colton's hand, and for the first time all night something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, something older and quieter than anger, something that lives in the place where a man keeps whatever he would die to protect. Boots. That is the Congressional Medal of Honor, Deputy, he said. It was placed around my neck by the President of the United States. Boots. Colton looked at the medal, looked at Elijah, looked back at the medal, and laughed, a short, ugly bark of a laugh. Boots. Sure it was, he said. He held the case out toward the passenger side. Hey, Doyle, come look at this. Boots. Our friend here, says the President, gave him a little necklace. Doyle took one look and went pale, because unlike Colton, Doyle recognized exactly what he was looking at. Boots. He'd seen one behind reinforced glass at the National Museum of the Marine Corps on a 6th grade field trip, and he remembered the docent telling their group you could count the number of living recipients on your fingers and toes and still have some left over. Boots. Wade, Doyle said, and his voice had gone tight in his throat. Wade, I think that's real. Real? Colton snapped the case shut hard enough to make Doyle flinch. Boots. This is some kind of gang medallion, worth maybe $50 at a pawn shop. He tossed it back through the open door. Boots. It hit the edge of the glove box and fell to the floorboard, with a sound that landed in Elijah's chest, harder than any of the shoving that came after it. Boots. Elijah closed his eyes. The same medal the President had settled around his neck with both hands. The same medal his mother had touched with trembling fingers while tears ran down into the collar of her good church dress. Boots. The same medal that stood for 2 men he'd carried out of open fire, and a ridgeline he'd cleared alone, now lying face down in the footwell of his own truck like a piece of litter somebody meant to throw away. Boots. Colton walked back and got directly into Elijah's face, close enough that Elijah could count the broken blood vessels in the whites of his eyes. Boots. Here's what I actually think, he said. I think you stole this truck. I think you're casing this street for your next hit. And I think that little medal is exactly as fake as your Marine story. Boots. I'd like to speak with your supervisor. You're looking at him. I'm senior officer on shift tonight, so whatever fantasy you've got in your head about this saving you, it's not coming. Boots. Colton grabbed Elijah's arm, wrenched it up behind his back, and drove him harder into the hood. Elijah's cheek hit the warm metal. Boots. Stop resisting, Colton barked, though Elijah was not resisting anything. His body had gone completely still. arms loose, legs steady, offering exactly nothing to fight against. Boots. There was no resistance in him at all. But Colton needed that word for the report he was already composing in his head, and a man like Colton had never once let the truth slow down a story he'd already decided to tell. Boots. Doyle stepped forward, his voice cracking slightly. "Wade, he's not resisting. He's not doing anything. Maybe we just cuff him and sort it out at the station." "Boots. I said cuff him, Doyle, now." Doyle's hands were shaking hard enough that the cuffs rattled against his belt buckle before he got them free. "Boots." He stepped up and looked at Elijah, and Elijah looked back at him, didn't beg, didn't plead, didn't say another word, just held that gaze with the kind of stillness that only exists in a man who has already faced real death and walked out the other side of it. "Boots." The cuffs clicked shut, cold steel against warm skin. Colton Frog marched him to the back of the cruiser, shoved his head down through the door, and slammed it hard enough to rock the whole vehicle on its shocks. "Boots." Through the window, Elijah watched his own belongings scattered across a stranger's street. The gym bag face down in the gutter, the mentorship worksheets lifting and turning in the evening breeze like something already being erased. "Boots." He looked down at his own wrists, at the handcuffs biting into skin he had once worn raw, dragging 2 Marines out of a kill zone, and understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that those same hands were now locked in steel in the back of a patrol car parked on American soil, in his own country, for the crime of driving 30 miles an hour through a neighborhood that had decided he didn't belong in it. "Boots." Colton leaned against his cruiser and started writing up the charges: resisting arrest, suspicious activity, possession of a suspected stolen item. "Boots." Every single word of it invented from nothing. But here's the thing you need to understand about that moment, because it's the hinge this entire story turns on. "Boots." The worst night of Wade Colton's career had not even started yet, because Elijah Marsh still had exactly 1 phone call left, and the name he was about to dial was going to walk something into that station that Wade Colton would spend the rest of his life failing to talk his way out of. "Boots." At the Ashcombe County Sheriff's Station, Elijah sat on a steel bench inside a holding cell, wrists still raw and reddened from the cuffs, a fluorescent tube overhead buzzing with a hum that seemed to drill directly into the silence. "Boots." A deputy he didn't recognize slid a landline phone across the intake counter. "One call," the deputy said, not unkindly, not looking him in the eye either. "Boots." Elijah didn't dial a lawyer. He didn't dial his mother, not yet. He scrolled to a contact saved under a single word, "General," and pressed call. "Boots." It rang twice. "Marsh," said the voice on the other end, deep and measured, a voice that had once moved a formation of 11,000 Marines with nothing more than the pitch of it. "Boots." "Sir, I'm at the Ashcombe County Sheriff's Station. I've been arrested." 3 full seconds of silence followed. Anyone who had spent real time around Thaddeus Renner learned early that his silences carried more weight than most men's full speeches did. "Boots." "Arrested for what?" the general finally said. "For driving through a subdivision, sir." Deputy said he smelled marijuana. There wasn't any. "Boots." "He found the medal in my glove box and called it a gang medallion. Threw it on the floor of my truck." "Boots." Another silence, shorter this time, but somehow heavier. "Say that address again, son," the general said, and for the first time in 14 years, Elijah heard something in that voice he had never once heard from Thaddeus Renner, in combat, in ceremony, or in grief. "Boots." He heard it shake. Word travels through a sheriff's department faster than any of the people inside it would ever admit to. "Boots." By the time Elijah was booked, fingerprinted, and moved from the holding cell to a folding chair beside intake, 3 deputies had already whispered the same rumor to each other in the break room. The arrest out in Birchwood was turning into a problem. Some 4-star general had called the front desk personally, and Sheriff Pratt had left a dinner reservation half-eaten to come sit in his office with the door shut. "Boots." At 11:52 p.m., a black government sedan with 2 motorcycle escorts pulled up outside the station, and General Thaddeus Renner stepped out in full dress uniform, 4 silver stars on each shoulder catching the parking lot floodlights, his aide half a step behind him carrying a leather folder. "Boots." He did not go to the front desk. "Boots." He walked straight through the lobby toward the sound of Elijah's voice, and when the duty sergeant tried to stop him at the security door, Renner simply looked at him, did not raise his voice, did not need to, and said, "I am here to see Sergeant Elijah Marsh, recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor, and I will be seeing him now. Boots. The room went still the way a room goes still right before something breaks. A deputy typing a report froze mid-keystroke. Boots. A dispatcher who had been half listening to a call turned her chair to watch instead. Boots. And Elijah, sitting in a folding chair with a paper cup of station coffee going cold beside him, looked up to see the man who had pinned a medal to his chest 9 years earlier, now standing in the middle of a county sheriff's office, jaw locked, eyes moving slowly and deliberately across the room, cataloging every deputy standing in it. Boots. Then something happened that not one person in that building would ever forget, and that at least 4 of them would describe under oath, in near-identical language, months later. Boots. The station's first sergeant, a retired Marine himself, working intake on the overnight shift, a man named Harold Okafor, who had done 2 tours before he ever pinned on a civilian badge, rose out of his chair at the sight of those 4 stars, came to attention, and saluted. Boots. Not the general. Elijah. He walked past Renner, stopped directly in front of the folding chair, and raised his hand to his brow in a parade ground salute, aimed squarely at a man sitting in handcuffed intake clothing with dried blood at one wrist. Boots. Nobody in that station moved for what felt like a full minute. The fluorescent hum kept buzzing. Somewhere down the hall a printer kept spitting out pages. Nobody was reading. Boots. But in that stretched, frozen silence, every deputy in the room understood exactly what they were looking at, and exactly what had been done to it 4 hours earlier on a quiet street in Birchwood Point. Boots. Sheriff Pratt came out of his office at a near run, tucking his shirt in as he moved general. Sir, I had no idea this situation had. I only just learned the details myself, I assure you. Boots. You had a Medal of Honor recipient in a holding cell for 4 hours, Renner said, quietly, which was worse than shouting, and not one person in this building thought to verify a single fact before writing up charges. Boots. Where is the arresting officer? Colton was pulled out of the report room. Boots. He came around the corner with his thumb still hooked in his belt, wearing the same posture he'd worn on the shoulder of that road 4 hours earlier. And for one more moment, the last moment his old certainty would ever survive intact. He still believed he was the one in control of the room. Boots. You must be the general everybody's whispering about, Colton said. Listen, I understand you 2 go back, but I made the call I made based on the totality of circumstances out there tonight, and I stand by every... Boots. Renner did not raise his voice even a single decibel. He didn't need to. Deputy, he said, do you know what that medal in your evidence bag represents? Boots. It's evidence in an open investigation, Colton said, still standing on ground that had already given way beneath him. Boots. It represents 2 men named Nathaniel Vance and Corey Hastings, who are alive today, with children of their own, because that man sitting in your holding cell ran 410 meters through open fire to carry them out one at a time. Boots. It represents a ridgeline he cleared by himself so the rest of his squad could come home. I placed it around his neck in the East Room of the White House with my own 2 hands. Boots. And you called it a gang medallion and threw it on the floor of his truck. Colton's jaw worked once, twice, searching for a sentence sturdy enough to hold up under that weight, and found nothing. Boots. For the first time all night, he said nothing at all. Every charge against Elijah Marsh was dropped within the hour. Boots. He was released at 1:14 a.m. with a written apology from Sheriff Pratt that Elijah folded once and put in the same pocket where he'd once kept his mother's index card. Boots. But the story did not end in that station. On that night, the way stories like this are supposed to end in the version people tell themselves to feel better before bed. Boots. It kept going, because Elijah Marsh had spent 14 years learning that the fight that mattered most was never the one in front of you. It was the one that came after, when the cameras were gone, and it would have been so much easier to simply let it go. Boots. Elijah Marsh filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Ashcombe County. 11 months later, it settled out of court for $3.1 million. Boots. He kept almost none of it. A third went to expand the Millbrook Mentorship Program into a full 3-county operation. Boots. A third seeded a scholarship fund named for the woman who had packed his lunch on the worst and best day of his young life, the Corinne Marsh Future Leaders Scholarship for first-generation college students out of Millbrook, North Carolina. Boots. The rest was split between a veterans support network and a legal defense fund for other families who had lived through some version of what happened to him on that street, and never had a four-star general to call. Boots. 3 months after the settlement, a letter arrived on congressional letterhead. Elijah was being invited to testify before a House subcommittee on policing reform. Boots. He said yes before he'd finished reading the second paragraph. He sat at a long witness table in a wood-paneled hearing room in Washington. Cameras stacked 3 deep along the back wall. Members of Congress arranged behind raised desks like judges in a courtroom that had no jury but the country watching. Boots. Beside him, in full-dress uniform, 4 silver stars catching the overhead lights, sat General Thaddeus Renner. Elijah spoke for 11 minutes without a single note card in front of him. Just a man telling the truth in the same calm, level voice that had once called out fireteam maneuvers under live rounds. Boots. He described the stop, the search, the metal on the floor of his own truck, the 4 hours in a holding cell while a deputy joked with another officer about his fake little necklace 20 feet away. Boots. And then he said the line that would be replayed, cut, captioned, and shared more times than anyone in that hearing room could have predicted. Boots. I did not need a Medal of Honor to deserve basic human dignity. Nobody does. But the fact that I had one, and it still was not enough, that should tell this committee everything it needs to know about where we actually stand. Boots. The room went silent in a way rooms almost never go silent anymore. One congresswoman on the second row wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and did not try to hide that she was doing it. Boots. So where is everyone now? Elijah Marsh still lives in Millbrook. On the same street, his mother walked before dawn for 26 years on her way to a job that paid her $11.40 an hour. Boots. Things look different there now. What began as 2 folding chair sessions a week in a single room at the community center has grown into a full program running across 3 counties, with 68 kids enrolled last semester alone. Boots. Elijah still teaches the same things he always taught: discipline, respect, accountability, how to stand tall when the world is actively pushing down on your shoulders. Boots. But he teaches one more thing now. He teaches them their rights. Every new kid who walks through that door gets a small laminated wallet card. Boots. One side lists exactly what to do during a traffic stop: hands visible, interior light on, ask for a badge number, request a supervisor by name. Boots. The other side carries a single sentence in bold print: you deserve to be treated with dignity. That is not a privilege. Boots. It is the law. And clipped to the corner of every one of those cards, threaded on a short loop of cord, is a small brass coin engraved with the words his grandfather gave him before boot camp, and that Elijah now presses into the hand of every graduating senior in the program. Stand tall. Boots. Colton's story ends differently. Wade Colton was convicted on charges of deprivation of rights under color of law and falsifying a police report, and is now 3 years into a federal sentence at a correctional facility outside Butner, North Carolina. Boots. He filed one appeal. It was denied in under 6 minutes of deliberation. His wife of 19 years filed for divorce 8 months into his sentence. Boots. His pension, the one he'd built over 16 years of service, the one he used to talk about at neighborhood cookouts like it was proof of something, was revoked in full. Boots. The name that once meant safety to the residents of Birchwood Point now means something else entirely on the other side of that same gate. Boots. He will be eligible for parole in a little over 2 years, but the federal registry that follows him will not expire the way his badge did. Boots. He will never carry a weapon with the state's authority behind it again. He will never again have the power to stand over another human being on a public street and decide, on nothing but instinct, exactly what that person is. Boots. What people do not know, because he has never said it to another living soul, and likely never will out loud, is that on the 6-month anniversary of his sentencing, alone in a cell, nothing but a government-issue mattress and 40 square feet of concrete, Wade Colton read a newspaper clipping a cousin had mailed him without a note attached. Boots. It was a photograph from the congressional hearing. Elijah Marsh, seated, calm, 4 stars in dress uniform beside him. Colton read the caption 3 times. Boots. He did not cry. He did not write a letter of apology that he never sent, the way people do in stories that want to let a man off easy. Boots. He simply sat with it, in that silence for a long time, in a way he had never once allowed himself to sit with anything in 16 years of wearing a badge that told him he was always, by definition, in the right. Boots. Whatever moved through him in that cell that night belonged to him alone, And it changed nothing about what he owed, and it changed nothing about what had already been taken from him. Boots. But something in him had finally stopped arguing. Elliot Doyle left law enforcement the same week Colton was indicted. He didn't fight the department's internal findings against him, and he didn't give a single interview, though 3 networks asked. Boots. He disappeared from public view for almost a year. When he resurfaced, he was enrolled in a social work program at a state university 2 hours from Ashcombe. Boots. He graduated 18 months later and now works for a regional nonprofit that trains active duty officers on de-escalation and what the curriculum calls the duty to intervene, the moment a fellow officer crosses a line and the choice that follows it. Boots. He leads a recurring workshop called The Cost of Staying Quiet, and he opens every single session with the same 9 words. Boots. I was the one who said nothing. I don't want you to be. Sheriff Douglas Pratt did not run for re-election the following spring, and few people in Ashcombe County were surprised. Boots. His seat went to Renata Osei in a special election, the first black sheriff in the county's 140-year history. On her first morning in office, she implemented 3 policy changes that made the front page of the Ashcombe Herald. Boots. Mandatory body camera activation with no manual override available to any deputy on shift, an independent civilian oversight board with genuine subpoena power. Boots. And a zero-tolerance policy on racial profiling, with automatic external review triggered by any complaint that even mentions it. General Thaddeus Renner retired the following year after 39 years of service. Boots. At his retirement ceremony in front of a formation of Marines standing at parade rest, he said the line that would become the most quoted sentence to come out of this entire story, repeated on television, printed on a banner at Elijah's own mentorship graduation the following June. Boots. The bravest thing I ever witnessed in nearly 4 decades did not happen on a battlefield, he said. It happened on a suburban street, when a man in handcuffs kept his dignity intact while the people sworn to protect him tried, with everything they had, to take it away from him. Boots. On a warm evening the following spring, at the community center in Millbrook, the very first class of the Corinne Marsh Future Leaders Scholarship gathered for its inaugural awards ceremony. Boots. 3 names were called. 2 young women from Millbrook, 1 young man from Ashcombe County who stood up, visibly nervous, and told the room he wanted to study criminal justice. He wanted, he said, to be the kind of officer this whole town had needed on a Friday night the year before. Boots. Corinne sat in the front row in her good church dress, the same one she'd worn in the East Room of the White House 9 years earlier, and cried through the entire ceremony without once looking away from the stage. Boots. Afterward, in the parking lot under a string of cafe lights, someone had hung between 2 oak trees. Elijah pressed a small brass coin into the palm of the young man who wanted to study criminal justice, the same coin his own grandfather had once pressed into his palm, and said only 2 words. Boots. Stand tall. Neither of them said anything else. Neither of them needed to. If this story reached something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognize someone in it, maybe someone you've been, maybe someone you've stood next to and said nothing about, like this video so it finds the person who needs to hear it tonight. Boots. Share it with somebody who's been made to feel invisible in a room they had every right to stand in. Boots. And leave a comment telling me this. Have you ever stood on that street watching and known deep in your gut which side of it you were really on? I read every single one.